After World War II, the United States encountered a lasting problem related to its borders. This issue revolves around taking water from the land for farming and the complex interactions of cooperation and rivalry among states. In this discussion, we'll look into the difficulties of this problem, questioning whether the current borders can last and suggesting different viewpoints. Come along as we uncover the problem with the USA's borders. The Union was established when Delaware became the first state to ratify the recently drafted U.S. Constitution on December 7, 1787. 12 other states did the same during the following 2 years, so by 1790, the original 13 states had been completed. In 1791, Vermont joined as the 14th state, and by 1803, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Ohio had also been admitted. The acquisition of the Louisiana Territory from France in the same year doubled the country's size, initiating a period of significant expansion. Between 1812, when Louisiana was admitted, and 1912, when Arizona became the 48th state, the United States added 31 states, averaging a new state every 3 years during this period. This westward expansion continued until 1912, when Arizona's admission marked the completion of the country's territorial growth. For the subsequent 47 years, the American map remained unchanged. In 1959, Alaska joined as the 49th state, and less than 9 months later, Hawaii became the 50th and final state to enter the Union. This event in 1959 marked the conclusion of the country's statehood expansion, solidifying its current geographical configuration. Now, 62 years have passed without any alterations to the American map, marking the longest period of stability in the country's history. While the prospect of change looms on the horizon, particularly with the growing momentum for Puerto Rican and DC statehood, it is evident that the United States has entered a phase where its dynamism has diminished. The era of territorial expansion has concluded, with all available land on the continent now claimed. The current stagnant state of borders, persisting for over a century, presents a new opportunity for introspection. Instead of seeking expansion beyond existing borders, there is a chance to focus on the internal lines that define the country. During the rapid period of state additions, little consideration was given to the intricacies of borders and their long-term impact on states. Many borders were drawn without regard for the landscape or natural barriers, resulting in straight and inflexible divisions that have proven detrimental. It may be time for the U.S. to re-evaluate its internal divides, ushering in a new era not of expansion but optimization. Anticipating skepticism, one might question the need for changing existing borders, especially given the overall success of the country in the past century. However, it's essential to acknowledge that not all states were created equal. While some have thrived and become significant contributors, others have been left disadvantaged by their geography and the arbitrary borders that confine them. When contemplating the potential for change, an argument surfaces suggesting that the USA, despite its accomplishments, could benefit from re-evaluating its internal structure. Such a re-evaluation could pave the way for a more equitable distribution of resources and opportunities among states, fostering a future that is both inclusive and prosperous for the entire nation. To underscore the impact of arbitrary state creation, let's delve into 3 instances where states have directly suffered due to their haphazard formation. Take West Virginia, for example, separated from Virginia in 1863. Since then, it has found itself in one of the poorest and least developed regions of the country. Consistently ranking at the bottom in various metrics, such as 50th in median household income, 49th in per capita income, 44th in overall poverty rate, 50th in life expectancy, and 50th in college education. West Virginia's challenges become evident, highlighting the consequences of geographical happenstance on a state's well-being. Nestled entirely within the Appalachian Mountains, the state lacks flat land suitable for farming, faces difficulties in transporting materials for manufacturing, struggles to develop large cities, and poses obstacles for people moving to the area. Its primary economic driver, coal mining, has sustained the state historically. However, with the decline of the coal industry, opportunities for employment are diminishing, leading to population decline. Without diversified industries to rely on, West Virginia struggles to retain its population and attract newcomers. The state's geographic constraints within the Appalachians limit its self-sufficiency. Considering this, it might be more beneficial for West Virginia to be part of a larger, more diversified state rather than an independent entity. While recombining with Virginia seems like an obvious choice, the geographical barrier of the Appalachians might make merging with Ohio or Kentucky a more practical solution. This could provide easier access through shared rivers connecting to the Great Lakes or the Mississippi River. Such a move could offer West Virginians an alternative with less challenging terrain while remaining within the state. It's important to understand that the present challenges faced by West Virginia are not solely a consequence of its own choices, but trace back to hastily defined borders during a period of separation from Virginia. The dedication of West Virginians to the Union shouldn't mean being stuck in a state predestined for economic difficulties. Taking a fresh look at and possibly adjusting borders could present an opportunity for a more sustainable and thriving future for the region. To the west lies the state of Nevada, where, despite a more favorable economic situation than West Virginia, geographical challenges, particularly in topography, present unique difficulties. In most regions globally, rivers flow from mountains to the coast, forming watersheds or drainage basins where all the water within an area ultimately converges into the same destination. However, Nevada faces a distinct scenario due to the arrangement of its mountains. In certain configurations, mountains can block all routes to the ocean, creating what is known as an endorheic basin. The Rocky Mountains, in this case, have given rise to a substantial internal watershed, the Great Basin. Thousands of years ago, during the last ice age when increased moisture prevailed, the basin accumulated enough water to form the vast Lake Bonneville. In the present, under a more arid climate, the lake has dwindled to its deepest section, now recognized as the Great Salt Lake. The remainder of the basin has evolved into the largest of the country's 4 deserts. Nevada faces unique challenges due to its distinct geography. While the Great Basin Desert stretches across several states like Wyoming, Utah, Idaho, Oregon, California, and parts of Mexico. Nevada is the only state almost completely surrounded by this vast desert. The scarcity of water in much of Nevada has been a long-standing issue, and before 1940, it was the least populated state in the country. A significant turning point came with the legalization of gambling, transforming Nevada into the fastest-growing state from 1940 to 2003. However, this rapid growth has created new problems, particularly with water. People tend to settle in areas with easy access to water, putting a strain on the state's resources. As a result, Nevada continues to grapple with the increasing challenges of water shortages, highlighting the ongoing struggle between the state's growth and the limited availability of this essential resource. The Great Basin Desert covers many states like Wyoming, Utah, Idaho, Oregon, and California. It even stretches into parts of Mexico. But Nevada is the main state tucked right into this dry basin. This causes a big problem for Nevada because there isn't much water. A lot of people in Nevada struggle to get enough water, and this has been a big challenge for a long time, slowing down how many people can live there. Because of the lack of water, Nevada has faced issues with growing its population. It's hard for people to live there when there isn't enough water for everyone. This has been a challenge for a while and has affected how much the state can grow. Before 1940, Nevada held the dubious distinction of being the least populous state in the nation, harboring only 110,000 residents. The transformative shift occurred when the state made a pivotal decision to legalize gambling. This landmark choice propelled Nevada into unprecedented growth, earning it the status of the fastest-growing state from 1940 until 2003. The influx of millions of residents concentrated in areas with accessible water sources, underscoring the profound impact of water availability on population distribution. However, as Nevada continues its trajectory as one of the fastest-growing states in the country, the specter of extreme water shortages looms large. This challenge is exacerbated by the state's need to contend with neighboring California for water rights, further intensifying the struggle for a finite resource. Nevada became a state because of the urgent needs during the American Civil War. To make sure Abraham Lincoln won the election, Nevada was quickly added to the Union just 8 days before the vote, even though it only had around 10,000 people. Much less than the usual 60,000 needed for statehood, this rushed decision driven by the desire to support Lincoln meant Nevada became a state without access to important water sources like the Colorado River and Lake Mead. In its early days, the state was missing not only Las Vegas, but also 80% of the people who would eventually live there. While Nevada's subsequent absorption of part of the Arizona Territory improved its access to water, particularly from Lake Mead, the broader challenge of inadequate water access persists, hindering the state's capacity to expand beyond the confines of Las Vegas. The last example discusses the geographical and agricultural characteristics of states in the central United States, including Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, Iowa, South Dakota, and North Dakota, situated in the Great Plains region. It questions the rationale behind having multiple states governing what is essentially a cohesive area dominated by continuous farming. In this vast expanse, the once expansive grasslands have been transformed into a thriving agricultural corridor, contributing significantly to the country's agrarian strength. However, the passage raises a pertinent query about the need for separate state governance in this region. It points out that maintaining multiple state governments can be economically burdensome for residents, as it entails higher taxes for essentially the same services. Furthermore, the intricacies of coordinating efforts and taking decisive actions come to the forefront, particularly vital in sectors like agriculture, where how land is managed regionally significantly affects the economy. The historical backdrop of the Dust Bowl, a consequence of poor land management, serves as a cautionary tale, underscoring the importance of effective decision-making. Concurrently, present-day apprehensions regarding the diminishing Ogallala Aquifer also come into focus. The Ogallala Aquifer, a central component in this discourse, is elucidated as an underground reservoir gradually formed by water soaking into the soil, essentially creating an expansive subterranean lake. This natural resource takes center stage in discussions about contemporary challenges, including the potential resurgence of problems like the Dust Bowl due to insufficient land management practices and the ongoing reduction of the aquifer's water levels. The need for strategic actions in the agricultural sector becomes increasingly evident as historical lessons intertwine with present-day concerns, emphasizing the importance of sustainable land and water management practices. Since World War II, big farms have been using a lot of water from the Ogallala Aquifer to grow crops in the central U.S. This turned a once dry and grassy area, known as the prairie, into vast fields of corn. However, using so much water is slowly draining the aquifer. The aquifer spans 8 different states, and managing it requires these states to cooperate. But here's the problem. Since each state benefits economically from taking out as much water as possible for farming, they don't really work together. It's like a shared resource problem known as the tragedy of the commons, where everyone tries to take as much as they can, even if it means there won't be any water left eventually. This is usually when regulations from a higher authority like the federal government should step in to prevent overuse. But in the US, getting different states to agree on things can be tough. If fewer states, or even just one, were in charge and understood that their whole economy relied on farming, then the responsibility to fix the issue would be on a single entity. For example, Texas, with its diverse economy, heavily relies on groundwater for irrigation and has seen significant drops in the aquifer level. With a more centralized approach, the problem might be easier to tackle. The challenge arises when the Ogallala Aquifer dries up in places like Texas, where it might not pose as significant a problem due to their diversified economy. However, for states heavily reliant on farming, a substantial decrease in production could spell disaster. Experts estimate that we may only have a decade or two left of being able to use water from the aquifer, underscoring the urgent need for action to avert this crisis. The issue stems from the fact that the borders of these states were established before we understood these water-related problems. Now that we are aware, it becomes crucial to question whether maintaining these state lines is worth it, especially if it means people in these states could lose their jobs and be forced to relocate within just a few years. As we confront the impending water scarcity, reassessing and potentially adjusting state boundaries becomes a pressing consideration for the well-being of communities relying heavily on agriculture. In the past, when a similar situation led to thousands of farmers losing their jobs, around 2.5 million people left states like Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, and Nebraska, heading to places like California. This triggered the worst economic period in the country's history. What I'm trying to emphasize is that the current borders might not be the most practical, given our knowledge now. It could be beneficial to start thinking about changing them. So, let's explore what improved borders could look like. Comparing the United States to Europe is a common practice due to shared histories, cultures, and geographical similarities. The US, spanning 9.8 million square kilometers, is nearly equivalent to Europe's 10.1 million square kilometers. In turn, America's 50 states are roughly comparable in size to Europe's 44 countries. However, a significant difference arises in population density. Europe, with 746 million people, accommodates more than twice the population of the United States, which has 330 million people. This means that in Europe, a larger population is distributed across fewer sovereign states. Taking Texas as an example, the second largest US state, it surpasses the size of Europe's second largest country, Ukraine. Although Ukraine has a population of 44 million, 15 million more than Texas. France, Europe's third largest country, is only slightly larger than California, the US's third largest state, but has a population nearly 20 million greater. Similar population disparities are observed in other large countries like China, with 33 major subdivisions and 1.4 billion people, India, with 36 subdivisions and 1.3 billion people, and Africa, with 54 countries and a total population of 1.2 billion. This leads to the suggestion that the United States might have too many states. Using Europe as a benchmark, a simple proportion of its population over subdivisions suggests that around 20 states could be adequate for a country with 330 million people. Various approaches can be taken to reduce 50 states to 20, and opinions on the best method will vary. Initially, a simplification involved combining neighboring states with careful selection and consideration of new populations and sizes. However, this process revealed the challenge of creating long, straight lines that overlooked local nuances. Upon further examination, it became clear that this method still presented issues. In the course of research, an existing 20-state arrangement employed by the United States Geological Survey was discovered, addressing many of the previously mentioned problems. Notably, a significant aspect of the challenges discussed relates to water resources. The map that drew attention illustrates the country's water resource regions, diverging from current state boundaries to align with genuine hydrological units. Each state is essentially defined by a single drainage area, providing a distinctive perspective on the nation's geography. Dividing the country like this has a bunch of benefits. First, each state has its own natural routes for transportation, making it easy to get around. It also gives each state full control over its water resources. In simpler terms, each state has complete control over its water and doesn't have to depend on other states or borrow water from them. Upon closer examination, we observe that Nevada and Utah have been replaced by the Great Basin, a state characterized by its extreme scarcity of water. While this might initially sound impractical, the benefit lies in the potential for implementing more suitable water management regulations. For instance, the state could enforce restrictions on water usage unrelated to human survival, such as prohibiting lawn watering in the midst of a desert, eliminating water parks, golf courses, and, notably, discouraging irrigation-intensive agriculture. Although a statewide ban on most forms of farming might appear drastic, this restructuring allows each state to have a clearer purpose, with agriculture becoming the responsibility of states with more abundant water resources, such as those in the Midwest. The lands above the Ogallala Aquifer, for instance, have been consolidated into two states based around the Missouri River watershed and the Arkansas River watershed, streamlining decision-making and action against aquifer depletion. The consolidation of the Ohio drainage basin transforms West Virginia into a larger, more economically diverse state, potentially better equipped to address and improve its current challenging conditions. Overall, this proposed layout seems more intuitive, fostering the development of distinct cultures and identities within each region. However, it's essential to acknowledge that there are anomalies and challenges in this proposed arrangement. The Rio Grande, serving as a significant component of the country's southern border, splits its drainage basin between the US and Mexico, resulting in a panhandle-like extension following the river's course. The same happened to the Great Lakes Basin, where the placement of Canada's border breaks the southern portion of the watershed into a narrow region extending from Minnesota all the way into New York's Lake Ontario coast. Besides that, however, I think the character of the East Coast has been pretty well preserved, breaking it up into New England, the Mid-Atlantic, and the South Atlantic Gulf, though it should be noted that each of these isn't based around a single watershed, as the rivers here become much smaller than in the middle of the country, and rather, each state is a collection of smaller river basins that all empty into a single area. A similar thing happens with California, where it's easier to group all the numerous smaller rivers coming from the coastal mountains than to make each their own entity. But don't worry, what these states lose in their internal connectivity is made up for by the greater accessibility they get through having a coastline. Problems emerge when looking north, however, where we find what's called the Soros Red Rainy Watershed. Here we see international borders again interrupt our plan. Only, unlike the southern border, this one between the US and Canada doesn't follow the river, but rather runs straight through it, leaving only an uneven sliver of the true watershed named for the rivers flowing through it. All of these waters empty into Canada to lakes like Winnipeg and Lake of the Woods, and eventually to the Hudson Bay. This creates a really fractured and not really navigable state that would probably be better off traded to Canada for the rest of some of our watersheds like the Missouri and Columbus. Ironically, our borders used to accommodate this, but the US and Canada actually swapped these lands in order to have a straight line. In essence, restructuring the country in this manner appears to have the potential to enhance the functioning of individual states and, consequently, the entire nation. However, like any system, it would not be without its own set of shortcomings. Remarkably, this concept of regional organization isn't new. It was proposed by a man named John Wesley Powell way back in 1890. Powell, having personally explored and mapped much of the American frontier, developed a blueprint for the western states. Regrettably, when Powell presented his map to Congress, it didn't gain much traction. Instead, the current state arrangement, which differs from his proposed plan, became the norm. Despite the potential benefits of Powell's vision, the complexities of implementing such changes and the resistance to altering established systems resulted in the continuation of the existing state structure we have today. Flash back to 1912, when these borders were set in stone and the US population was a mere 95 million. Less than a third of today's bustling populace. With this in mind, perhaps it's worth considering not a reduction in the number of states, but an increase to accommodate the significant growth we've experienced since then. Over the past century, a distinct hierarchy of states has emerged. Leading the pack are California and Texas, not coincidentally the two largest and most populated states in the contiguous 48. Their substantial size has granted them considerable influence, casting a shadow over many neighboring states. This prompts the question, is it truly equitable to allow some states to be considerably larger than others? As we navigate the changing landscape of population dynamics, rethinking the state map may be a pertinent conversation to ensure a fair and balanced representation across the nation. In California, there have been proposals to split the state into as many as 6 smaller states. One advocate of this idea is Tim Draper, a venture capitalist who invested $5 million to try to get his plan on the 2016 ballot. However, he later abandoned the idea of 6 Californias and opted for a 3-state model. In contrast, When Texas joined the Union, it had the option to divide itself into up to 5 smaller states. However, there were no specific guidelines on how to carry out this division. The most popular suggestion, proposed after the 2008 election by the website 538, involved splitting Texas into the Plainlands, El Norte, New Texas, the Gulfland, and Trinity. However, if California is only broken into 3 states, the argument could be made that Texas only really needs to be broken in 2. The easiest way to do this would probably be to use the Texas-Colorado River, which runs pretty cleanly straight through the middle of the state. This would result in a North Texas containing Dallas-Fort Worth and Houston, and a South Texas with cities like San Antonio, El Paso, and Corpus Christi. Austin, Texas, the current state's capital, is actually bisected by the Colorado River, placing parts of the city in both states, meaning they'd both likely want to find different capitals, while Austin would act as the bridge between them. Of course, California and Texas are both well aware of the advantages that come with their massive sizes, and therefore would likely never agree to something like this. Now let's see if applying some criteria for the United States. Starting with the simplest factor, language. English is overwhelmingly the most spoken language in every state. Even in regions where Spanish is the second most common language, such as along the country's southern border, it is used by less than 30% of the population. Therefore, dividing the country based on linguistic lines would seem nonsensical. In the realm of religion, the landscape differs between the United States and Africa. While Africa is almost evenly divided between Islam and Christianity, 2 distinct religions. The religious scene in the US is notably characterized by the overwhelming prevalence of Christianity. To discern variations within Christianity, one must delve into the different branches, effectively segmenting the country into 3 or 4 major segments, alongside various smaller denominations. This religious diversity within Christianity adds nuance to the American religious tapestry, distinguishing it from regions where broader religious divisions are more evenly distributed. But considering one of the foundational principles of this country was the separation of church and state, it just feels a little backward to literally define states based on their biggest churches. And so, finally, that leaves race, or, in this case, ethnicity, which, is where things get complicated. Looking at a map of the country by the largest ancestry group, we'll find only 6 groups represent more than 5% of the country's population: German, English, African, Mexican, Irish, and Italian, some of which have formed a solid block, while others have more sporadic, non-continuous distributions. However, one thing a map like this is good at showing is settlement patterns. Because the English were the first immigrants to arrive by the East Coast and establish a population, they provided a baseline stock across the nation, on top of which subsequent immigrant groups would build. For this reason, today's English-speaking population doesn't really form a cohesive territory outside of areas like the Appalachians and Rockies where no one else wants to live. The wave of German immigration predominantly took place from 1820 to 1910, attracting around 6 million individuals to cross the Atlantic, enticed by advertisements offering affordable land. A distinctive feature setting the German immigrants apart from many others was their requirement to have the means to purchase farms. In contrast to several immigrant groups settling in urban centers on the East Coast, the majority of Germans opted to invest in prime farmlands in the Midwest. This choice significantly contributes to the present scenario, where the German ethnic group constitutes nearly 50 million people, surpassing half of Germany's total population. The intentional focus on agriculture during their migration has left a lasting impact on the demographic landscape and cultural fabric of both the Midwest and the broader United States. African Americans have quite the opposite tale to tell, mostly being brought over through the slave trade. From just under 600,000 people brought into the country, the African American population has grown to just over 40 million, with their concentration in the South reflecting where slavery was practiced most commonly. With ongoing immigration from Mexico, Mexican Americans have become the 4th largest ethnic group in the United States, totaling 37 million. and they hold the distinction of being the fastest-growing ethnic community. The geographical proximity between the United States and Mexico has led to a distinct pattern in their migration. Unlike many other immigrant groups entering through the East Coast, most Mexican immigrants have crossed the U.S.-Mexico border directly. Consequently, their distribution spans across southern Texas, extending through New Mexico, Arizona, and reaching Southern California. This unique migration pattern has shaped the demographic landscape, contributing to the significant and growing presence of Mexican Americans in these regions. The stories of the Italians and Irish share striking similarities. Driven by significant hardships in their home countries, both communities were compelled to immigrate to America, arriving in a state of considerable impoverishment. Their early experiences were predominantly centered around the cities where they first landed. New York City became a focal point for Italians, while the Irish established communities in Boston and Philadelphia. This common thread led to the development of smaller, tightly knit populations concentrated in and around these eastern urban centers, defining the early presence of both Italian and Irish communities in the broader American landscape. Ultimately, though, a deeper examination shows how deceptive a map such as this is, regardless of how powerful one group may appear to be in a particular area. Just 29% of people claim English ancestry in Utah, the state with the highest English population. Even the most German state, North Dakota, only has 39% German people. Even the most African-American state, Mississippi, has a 38% African population. Only 33% of Texas, the state with the largest Mexican population, is Mexican. The most Italian state, Connecticut, is only 18% Italian, whereas the most Irish state, New Hampshire, is only 20% Irish. This indicates that there isn't a single ethnic group that constitutes a majority anywhere in the nation. It is therefore blatantly incorrect to describe the people who reside here using a map like this one. Generally speaking, attempts to divide the U.S. into distinct regions based on language, religion, and ethnicity have shown us that these criteria aren't really helpful in describing the country as a whole, demonstrating that the country is actually considerably more cohesive than we may realize. The most favorable borders are often shaped by natural barriers, as these geographical features frequently give rise to distinctive cultural traits within a population. Communities residing along the coast differ from those in the desert, mountains, grasslands, and forests. Therefore, our aim is to propose borders based solely on naturally occurring boundaries, such as mountains and rivers. The nation is crisscrossed by three major mountain ranges: the Appalachian Mountains, acting as a divide between the Midwest and the East Coast, the Rockies marking the end of the grasslands, and the Cascade Mountains, separating the interior deserts from the coastal woods. Additionally, rivers play a crucial role in expanding and defining the country's interior, providing prominent and easily accessible waterways. However, the challenge with relying on rivers is that they tend to gradually branch into smaller streams, resulting in numerous unfinished boundaries. This geographical tapestry of mountains and rivers shapes the landscape, contributing to the diverse and varied regions across the United States. Presently, there are a total of 28 states encompassing Hawaii and Alaska, each with borders determined by the surrounding terrain. The Appalachians and their rivers played a role in dividing the East Coast into medium-sized states, while the tributaries of the Mississippi River formed larger bodies spanning the Great Plains, ending abruptly where the plains meet the Rockies. Creating states in areas with few rivers posed significant challenges. The Great Basin in the middle of the country is a notable example, lacking many rivers to naturally define state borders. This difficulty in creation left a substantial void in the middle. The situation was somewhat alleviated by the Cascade Mountains along the Pacific coast, resulting in states that somewhat resemble the current layout. The intricate dance of geography has played a pivotal role in shaping the diverse and varied states that make up the United States today. Examining the various approaches to dividing the nation, it seems reasonable to assert that as long as the current model continues to function, or at least doesn't completely collapse, None of these proposed alternatives are likely to replace the existing structure. However, what are your thoughts? Do you find the current model preferable? Or do you think one of the suggested alternatives is better? Or do you believe that the boundaries of America could be redrawn even more thoughtfully and skillfully? Share your insights and opinions on the matter. Please share your thoughts with me in the comments section below. Besides that, make sure to like the video and subscribe if you want to keep seeing videos like this. Thanks.